All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. For my latest video, I'm delighted to be joined by someone whose work I've admired for many years, and this is the first time we've had the opportunity to connect and have a proper chat. Although we did share the stage together at one time, we'll talk about that. It's my pleasure to welcome from the great state of Colorado, Lindsey Anderson. Lindsey, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. I'm great. Colorado life is almost as advertised. You look around and everything looks like that postcard, like greetings from Colorado. So it really is lovely.
Excellent. I have a couple of very dear friends who live in Colorado, and I visited before, and it's a lovely place.
It really is. And the funny thing is I live in it's like a college town. And college towns attract a lot of like music culture. They have like a little scene. And it's funny that members of the Descendants live here, and so there's a little scene around that. And we have our local punk rock bar called the Surfside Seven. It's sort of like the connections, or dingbats, or
Yep.
whatever, of Fort Collins. And yeah, it's really it's great. It's kind of nice to have that.
Very cool. And you just mentioned two clubs from New Jersey, and
Of
we have
course.
a lot of mutual friends from Jersey that we'll definitely get into as we kind of unwrap this conversation, which has a lot of moving parts to it. So,
Yeah.
um, obviously, I wanted to start really at the very beginning for you. Now, you're originally from Westchester County in New York, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's funny because if I say I grew up in Scarsdale, people have definitely opinions about that. But it was much different, in the 60s and 70s. So my dad was just a born and bred New Yorker. He was born in Money Earned in Mount Vernon. And, when his family was moving on up, they moved to like Eastchester. And so, when my dad went to Columbia University where he met my mom, and so when they started their family and were living in an apartment, it's like I came along. I was like number three, and it's like, oh, well, we've got to get a house in the suburbs, and that was like the place thing to do and the place to live. So yeah, that's how I, wound up, growing up in Westchester County. But it's like growing up in New Jersey. The gravitational pull of Manhattan and the cultural scene and the music scene there is huge. And in addition to that, my dad was the treasurer for an orchestra that used to play at Carnegie Hall, the
Hmm.
National Orchestral Association. And so I grew up with music. Like like music was really important to my parents. Granted, it was classical music, but it's like we were all expected to like play instruments and be excellent. And so I had piano lessons and violin lessons, and I played in an orchestra. And then, one day, like, my mom bought this guitar because she was taking guitar lessons at church. And, then my sister grabbed it and she was like playing Smoke on the Water. Then she got bored with that. And then I grabbed it and I'm like, okay, what can I do with this? And so I started playing like Led Zeppelin songs and, Jimi Hendrix and over the time. And then I think when I was like 11 or 12, like Heart's Little Queen came out. And I was like, oh my God, girls can play rock and roll. So I was like, this is what I want to do. That's what I want to be. And I learned every single song on that album because I'd already been trained by ear from being a violinist. So for me, picking up the guitar was super easy, but that's all I would do was just play guitar in my room for hours and hours and hours. And then like when Blondie hit the scene, I was just like, okay, I'm all in.
Now, I know at some point your family moved to Southern California.
Yeah, so my parents got divorced in like 79 or 80. So my mom's family was in Southern California, so we had a support system there. And my mom had been a housewife for 20 years with four kids. And the East Coast establishment, wasn't there was no way she was going to like get a kind of job where she could support four kids. So she went out to Southern California where, She was like a rock star, and she got a job. She was a hospital administrator, and we were in the middle of Orange County, which was very different, living in this like 1,000 square foot condo in Orange County. And it was just a whole different scene, but it was a great time from 80 to 82 for punk rock. So you kind of like, fall into your tribe. You hang out with the weirdos. The kids were like impressed with my record collection, which was like all East Coast based, like, Dolls and Heartbreakers and stuff like that, even like the Tubes and the Sweet and stuff that I was Ramones. And then, at that time it was like Circle Jerks X, Black Flag started coming up, even like some bands like 45 Graves, Social Distortion, were starting up. So it was a really exciting time. It was just a completely different culture because, in the New York area, the drinking age was 18. Little kids could sneak into clubs. Nobody really cared. It wasn't like underage drinking was a problem. And then you go to Southern California, and it was almost like a police state. Like you hear that in bands like Black Flag or whatever. But we would go to parties where like bands were playing, and the cops would bust it and be like cracking a flashlight over kids' heads and dragging them off to juvenile hall. I remember drinking a beer, and someone's like, "The man is here." I'm like, "What man?"
The man.
Like throwing the beers and like jumping over the back fence, and I was like, what is going on here? Like, who cares? um but so that was really, really different, but the music was amazing, so I kind of like beefed up my record collection during those years. So when I moved back to the East Coast, I had a whole nother cool set of records, to trade with friends or play music or whatever.
Now you went from Southern California to Connecticut, right? That was the next.
Yes. That was definitely, culture shock. My mom had all these concerns that parents do, like, I want to live in a safe neighborhood and I want good schools for my kids. And so we moved to New Canaan, but, you know, at this time I did not fit in there. I don't even know how this happened, but my neighbors who worked at the supermarket, my neighbor, worked at the local supermarket and saw this ad for like a punk hardcore band, like pinned up on an index card. And he's like, "Oh, well, I think this is your kind of thing. Everyone else is listening to Genesis or something." And so I called up, and it was Jim Spadaccini from Vatican Commandos. And I was like, "Hey, I hear you're looking for a guitar player." So I went over to do my audition. I wore my t-shirt, which was like my credibility t-shirt, which was The Mad, the New York band, because Screaming Mad George used to live with my family when he was an art student. It's
Wow.
another weird thing. Yeah, that's like a whole nother weird, like when I was like 10. Um, he was going to SVA and like, just like living in our house. And he would like do stuff around the house and do his art. And he got me really into like monster movies. He sold me my first Dickies record, so I'll give that to George for like $3. The Incredible Shrinking Dickies. So anyway, so I did this audition. I guess it was like you're in the band because there's nobody else. They were in Darien, which is, a whole nother, they were like the weirdos of Darien, and I was like the weirdo New Canaan. And there was only a few of us, and we didn't have the internet or social media to find each other. You just kind of like be like, "Oh, you're cold, your clothes are cool, do you want to hang out?" You look like a cool person. Do you want to hang out? So that's how I got in with Jim Spad and Moby and whatever. And we went to Pogo's to shows, and that's how I met John Bomber, the guys from CIA, Lost Generation. Then we started playing shows like at the Anthrax or Pogo's was our other, hangout. So yeah, it was like suburban punks. My mom had a rule: you're only allowed to go out one weekend night. Like I could go to the movies at a gig, but I couldn't do like two gigs in a weekend. That was like that's too much. So mom stuff.
Now you replaced Moby in Vatican Commandos, correct?
I did. So Moby was in the band, and I don't know what it was, but him and Jim always had this like personality clash. And then Moby got kicked out, and then I like stumbled in to, at the time it was called Disorder. And then we had to change the name because it was a band in the UK called Disorder. And so, but me and the other guitar player, John, and also Moby, were getting really interested in like different kinds of music, like not just, punk rock, but we were really into like Joy Division and Kraftwerk and Bebop Deluxe and, Tangerine Dream and all this, we got really into like the new romantic stuff. And so like we wanted to go see Duran Duran, and everyone thought we were fags because that's what we were called, you guys are fags. So we started hanging around socially, but we were in this band. So after a while, I think that there was just a difference of ethos. And I used to wear, I got a thrift store, this Girl Scout uniform, with the beret. And it had like, I had a full sash with all the merit badges and a little mini skirt. And I had these thigh high leather boots. And that's like what I would wear on stage. And I would wear like red lipstick. And, I thought that, I wanted to be like Debbie Harry or something. And Jim would be like, no, you have to wear a plaid flannel shirt. I'm like, I don't even own a plaid flannel shirt. Like, I wasn't going to wear this like hardcore uniform. And then John had these like red trousers, because he wanted to dress like he was in the Clash. So he silk screened all these like button down shirts and would wear these like bondage pants. So, like, these red trousers because he wanted to be like Mick Jones. And that just wasn't working in the hardcore scene. Like, we wanted to be like rock stars, and it just wasn't fitting. So we both got booted out. And then Moby went back in. And I think we were at a watching a movie at Chuck Weaver's house. I don't know what happened. Like, I don't know whether they went outside to smoke cigarettes or what, but all of a sudden, like, Moby and Jim were like in this fist fight, which I guess is like Moby got kicked out, and then we got kicked out, and then he came back in, and then this fist fight broke out, and that was the end of that. But after that, Moby created this band called AWOL, and they were very, I don't know, bass heavy, atmospheric, influenced by like Joy Division. It was more like that kind of a thing than just straight up hardcore. And after a while, like, the hardcore scene got pretty, I don't know, macho, violent. It wasn't just like this inclusive punk rock thing. I just felt, I don't know, especially like toward the mid 80s, 84, 85, 86, I was like, there's no place for me here. Like, people want to kick my ass, and I just want to, play music and be different, and I don't know. So that was the end of that.
So how long from that point did it take for you to relocate to New York City?
Well, it's funny, that was my high school year. So I was like, I'm out of here. I actually tried to graduate early and move to the city, and my parents were just like, oh my God, you're only 17. So whatever, I graduated from high school and went to school in the city. And I was just like, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. And in that first year, I was working at a nightclub. There was also starting to happen, the whole hip hop scene, which I think was almost analogous with the punk rockers. They were kind of like moving in parallel, like a bunch of kids without any musical training, just grabbing this like kit of parts and expressing themselves, which whatever they could put together, which whatever tools were at their disposal. And so, um, I was very much tracking with like punk rock, but also with the hip hop scene. And toward the end of my first year of school, I actually joined this all female rap band. And we made this instructional rate like breakdancing video. Like we were the soundtrack for this. Is I mean, I would pay money to get my hand on this footage. I don't even know what happened to it, but we were this band called Lioness, and the woman had like put the whole thing and band together, and it was almost like this like Mary Jane Girls thing. But I wanted to be like serious. Like I was like, yeah, I want to rap, I want to do this, and like she wanted us to be like sexy and hot, and I'm like, I don't know, like if that's really what I want to do. Um, so I quit that, but it was funny at the same time, like the Beastie Boys were coming up, and it was one of the Beastie Boys said to me, like, I saw your picture in Russell Simmons' office. And I was like, because I think after, like, I don't know whether I quit or got kicked out, it was probably like 50-50. Um, yeah, this woman was really like trying to, make it in the scene. But I was like, yeah, I mean, I would want to do that, but I didn't want to do it that way. I didn't want to like, wear lingerie and be like, like that, leave that to the Mary Jane Girls or Vanity Six or, I'm not that at all.
I was thinking prior to us connecting for this, I was thinking about when I was first introduced to you as a musician.
Mhm.
That was, and I really want to say it wasn't the Kowalskis, who of course we'll get to. I think it was Starkist.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's when I first heard of you.
that was almost like sort of like a reawakening. So after that, whole lioness hip hop thing, I was like, here I am in New York City, I'm going to school. I I really wanted, I was kind of like this like fuck up in high school, not like fuck up, but I didn't apply myself or whatever. And I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to do the college thing, I'm going to do it 100%. So I did do that. And I got my teaching certificate. I got, whatever. I was like Miss Academia. And I was like, when I was in high school and I felt like this weirdo misfit, it was like those teachers who really gave a shit and reached out to me, which really helped me get through. And so I was like, okay. And I had these to serve with love visions in my head. So I kind of just like put music aside and started doing that. But of course, like it circles back, and a couple of years later, I was like, why did I stop doing music? um, and I was with someone for a long time, like 10 years. Like we met in college and he was always doing music. So I was always there in like the support role, like, hey, I'll help drive you to gigs and load in your gear and I'll do sound check and be like, okay, up, down, and oh, can you play this rhythm like while I work out my leads? And I was cool with that. But then I met a bunch of girls, like we started going out, like when his band started getting popular and we started going to all these gigs. I met a bunch of girls through going to these gigs, and I was like, hey, why don't we start a band? So that's how Starkist started. And at first it was kind of, people I think thought we were kind of a joke because we were just like these, club girls, and two of us, including me, were dating members of D Generation. So it was like, oh, that D Generation girlfriend band. But we were really into like a different kind of thing, like more into like glam rock and garage rock, and that's what we want to do. So we came up with the name Starkist because we're like, we used to put star stickers on our face, and we're like, yeah, it's like, we're from the stars, and it's like glam rock, and we're glamorous, and yada yada yada. But of course, what happens when you're a bunch of girls and you make a band with your friends, as guys do? They just make a band with their friends. We were like, yeah, we're like Starkist. And everyone's like, you're an all girl band? I'm like, yeah. They're like, okay, so Starkist, like the tuna? like, oh, I don't know how we were so naive. We were just like, oh no, we forgot about that. Um, so, but because we were doing this kind of like more glam rock thing, we had this great show at CBGB's with like the voluptuous horror of Karen Black, and that was like super fun. But yeah, as all things do and friendships do, that kind of imploded. But I was like, I can't stop playing. So that's how I was just like, okay, now that I'm back in it, I'm not getting out of it and I'm not stopping, and it was even a problem for my relationship. So it was like, oh, there should only be one band per family and girls shouldn't be in bands. And I thought, oh God, really? You know, but that's what it was. I'm just like, nope, I'm not gonna stop. I'm just gonna keep on going.
So would the Drags have been the next band?
Yes. So the Drags was so the drummer and the bass player for Starkist quit. They were like, we can't do this anymore. And I remember being after rehearsal, like crying. That's what happens when your band breaks up when you're a girl. Like, I'm sure guys want to cry too. They're just trying to play tough. And I was like, and the other guitar player, Addie, was like, don't worry, we'll make a new band and the new band will be better than the old band. It's like that kind of pep talk your mom gives you. And I was like, the old band. She's like, no, 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 we're gonna do this. So we this is how Paul came in, was that with the Drags, we had a bass player called Lee for a while, and then she dropped out, and this drummer called Moondoggy, and he was from New Hampshire. He Joe Hughes, Moondoggy, he played with the Queers, he played with the Vacant Lot, and so he had this great kind of like garage rock pedigree. And then we put an ad in the Village Voice, and Paul Richard from AOD actually um answered the ad, and I didn't talk to him. Addie did, as a bass player. So Paul came into the Drags like as a bass player, and when he showed up for the audition, I was like, oh my God, I actually wrote to AOD when I was in high school. And um I bought the Let's Barbecue thing and it said write to us. So somehow I took this as like a dare, and I was like, hi, if you come to Connecticut, you can come, like, I'll make you breakfast, yada, yada, yada. So they came and played pogos. And, this guy, Jeff Roberts, was doing a fanzine, I think with Bomber and Jib Spad, called Connecticut Underground Digest. And so I had them over and I didn't know what tour life was like. I had like no idea. So I was like, oh, Captain Crunch and Pop Tarts. And they were really looking forward to like this hot cooked breakfast. And no, I had like box cereal and like Pop Tarts. And I was like, they were like kind of bummed out. So Jack Steeples stepped in dog poop outside my house and tracked it through the house and actually wrote to Connecticut Underground Digest and said, the best thing about having breakfast at Lindsay's house was tracking dog shit through her like house. And so, because if you know Jack, like he's super cutting. And and I was a little bit crushed. I'm like, okay, well, I guess lesson learned. But I wrote this thing and like Paul sent me back this big, like long letter. It was like multi-page. He's like, here's our new demo tape. And he put wadded up cassette tape and like stapled it to the page. And I had this thing. And so he walked in and I'm like, holy shit, this is the guy I wrote like fan mail. And then he sent this thing back. And so I didn't tell him until after the audition. Like, we've met before, because I'm like, oh God, if I lead into that, like after that experience, he's just gonna be like, fuck you, I'm out. he stayed. It was shocking. It was really great.
Now, how active were the drags before what eventually became Killer Kowalski, that original incarnation?
I mean, we were doing a lot of shows. We did this kind of like mini tour with Speedball Baby and the Subsonics. And, it's like we recorded our demo, we made t-shirts, we did this tour thing, but it was pretty short-lived until, I think Doggy dropped out, um, and we got this amazing um, drummer called called Yarko, known as Jay Burnside from the Flaming Sideburns. He was a journalist from Finland who was in, New York for like a year. And I'm like, I'll take you for a year. He looked great, he played great, he was from that garage rock milieu. So we were just like, okay, you know, and that became sort of morphed into Killer Kowalski. And what I didn't realize is when we were picking names for bands, it was Doggy who came to the table with Killer Kowalski. And Richard Manitoba actually gave him the name. So, but I didn't know that it came from Richard. So, um, yeah, so he came, that became the band's name. And then, like, he dropped out, and Yarko came in, and Paul was still on bass. And it was just like this moving parts, like everything happened so fast that, when this iteration, and this was like Killer Kowalski started playing again, like you make a demo tape, you make t-shirts, you make stickers, we are trying to gain some momentum. But it was like so hard after Yarko had to go back to Finland after a year. I was like, geez, we need a drummer. And then Paul was kind of like dropping out. And again, the band fell apart, but Paul wanted to come back. But he's like, I want to be a guitar player. And then he's like, I know a bass player, Jack Steeples. And so that's where the whole band came back together with like Greg Farah, Paul, Jack. We even did like a couple of crazy gigs with my ex-husband, who was Kurt from LES Stitches, on guitar, Anthony Esposito from Lynch on bass, because we used to rehearse at his studio, and Greg on drums, because like the whole band like sort of imploded again. And I had these gigs booked. I'm like, okay, let's put it together. So then it was like finally when we had like Jack, Paul, Greg, me, our first gig was opening for Iggy Pop at Coney Island High.
Mm.
And we hadn't even rehearsed together. I mean, of course, me, Greg, and Paul had, but Jack hadn't. And I gave him the demo tape, and I gave him all like the charts, like the guitar tabs, like I wrote them all out and everything. And so he's like, yeah, I learned all the songs. And I'm like, okay. So we show up at Coney Island High. It's like before the gig. Iggy's upstairs sound checking. We're downstairs in the dressing room. I'm like, why don't we just, like the Ramones used to do this? The Ramones used to run through the entire set in the dressing room before they would go on stage. I was like, let's just run through the set. And they were like, no, we want to watch Iggy sound check. I'm in hell. Because I just didn't know. I mean, they're such pros. It like came off without a hitch, but I was like, oh my God, like talk by try by. I mean, this is punk rock. I guess it's trial by fire, but you know, punk rock doesn't mean you have to suck, or like playing out of tune isn't punk rock. Like I wanted to be good. I already felt like people were judging me because I was in this like crappy all girl band, and I'm like, oh God, if I suck, that's just going to be bad. I just didn't want to suck.
Well, it's kind of impossible to suck when you've got Paul and Jack in your band. I mean,
Yeah, there's no
AOD's
way.
got that reputation of they're funny, they make goofy songs, what have you. But watching them live, even recently when they came back with the original lineup, those are musical pros. They are next level players. You know, they'll probably go, oh, geez, when they hear that. But the truth is, they're masters of what they do. They're amazing
Absolutely.
players.
And that was always my aspiration. Like, I want to be the worst person in the band because it'll make me be better, you know? And, I did, bring other things to the table that, they made me be a better musician, number one. But, you know, I was, always living in mortal terror of sucking, that I would just go all out and pour like everything into what I was doing. And, it just kind of worked. So when we worked together, it was pretty unreal. So we did, I can't even remember when we did this gig, like maybe 2015 or 2016. And we hadn't played together in, like 4,000 years. So I booked some kooky show in like Gowanus, New Jersey or something. I don't even know how we did this. And we booked the show. We went to like our old rehearsal space in New Jersey. And it was the weirdest thing. We walked in that room. I'm like, oh God, what's this going to be like? And when we started playing, it was like, boom, we locked in. Everything was in lockstep. The entire set, like nobody fucked up. And I forgot one verse of one of Paul's songs in rehearsal. You know what I mean? Like, how did they go again? But it was the weirdest thing. Like it was like this weird muscle memory. Like, it was almost like we had never stopped playing. And that's, I think, when a band is a band,
Mm.
the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's, I think, what we were. So I was actually trying to get us onto, because this record label wanted to re-release our first album and do this like 25th anniversary thing, and we're putting that together. And I wanted to play the Rebellion Festival in the UK, and AOD was actually invited to join. So I was like, hey, I'll get Jack and Paul's airfare, right? So that's half of it, because that's going to double, for Kowalski's. Like, let's make this happen. And for some reason, it didn't happen, but I'm hoping that we can make it happen, in 2025, So, wow, 25 years of all hopped up on goofballs. That's kind of crazy. It's just astounding.
Well,
I'm
I
like,
know.
oh yeah, that was like 10 years ago. No.
Yeah, I was thinking back today, knowing we were going to talk. And we'll definitely get into New York in the 90s in a second because it's an
Yeah.
exciting time for me in my recollection. Um, but we were talking before we started recording, we did a show together at the Court Tavern. I was in Broken Heroes at the time. That's who was on
Yes.
that bill. An AOD reunion that evening. And then
Yeah.
it was like a massive blizzard. It was like the worst weather.
Oh
No.
my God. Yeah. It's so crazy.
And my memory gets confused because obviously I saw Jack and Paul there because they were playing with AOD, and Kitty and the Kowalskis was on the bill. And
Yes.
I think in some of the prior interviews I did with those guys, I wasn't quite sure who was actually in the band that night because I can't, obviously I see Paul and Jack in my mind because they were on stage, but were they playing with you that evening as well?
No, when it was Kitty and the Kowalskis, I think, we shared a drummer in Greg Farah.
Mhm.
And because he was playing with AOD at the time, because Dave was living in Florida. Um, and Mike McNamara from Sucks was playing bass with us.
Mhm.
And so there was an overlap between like Jersey scene and that, because he was doing Sucks, and I can't remember. I don't think he was playing with AOD that night, but like, you know, it's funny because there was a lot of overlap with those two bands. And then I think it was Mike Hoffman and he was also the guitar player in Vacant Lot for a while. And he went and joined the Kowalskis. It was funny because I almost felt like I stole him from Vacant Lot, but not really. So we used to play a lot of shows with Vacant Lot, and I thought they were great. Like Pete was a great songwriter, and they were so much fun and just amazing. And Mike and I became friends, and he used to do things in the middle of Vacant Lot songs, like play riffs from like Train Kept a Rollin' or like Cheap Trick songs and stuff in the middle of Vacant Lot. So I just like because I would think it's funny. And when we were working on a project with the Manges, which was a band that we toured in from Italy,
Hmm.
they wanted some lead guitar parts. So I called Mike and was like, hey, the Manges are in town, they're doing this recording. Do you want to do some guitar work on this? And then we started talking, and I was like, well, I don't want to break up the Vacant Lot or anything. But when we started talking, he's like, yeah, we're not really playing gigs anymore. I'm like, oh, hi. So, when we started playing together, and yeah, I did a show for my 50th birthday, and it was just like me and Mike and guitars, like playing songs that we liked. So like we opened that show with like it's just two of us, with Hello There, and we like play off each other, and it was just kind of like a goofy, party thing. But yeah, he's just one of these amazing people that was super fun to play with. But I think he was, I think it was him, Mike McNamara, Greg Farrar on drums, and me. And that was kind of like Kitty and the Kowalskis as a live band.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Like you said, it all kind of blends together because then you got the whole sucks connection. And
Yes.
by the way, if you Kaprowski, because I know you're watching.
Yes. Oh my God, Tommy, love him. He's always like so great and funny on stage, and you know, yeah, him and Jack play well off each other. And even when I was playing with Jack and he would like take the piss out of me on stage, like I couldn't be angry because it was so funny. So I was
Yeah.
never one of those people to be like, even when I was getting like heckled by little kids, I'd just be like, yeah, whatever, kid, your mom's paying me to babysit you. So, you're gonna be in trouble when she gets home.
There
Yeah.
was one time, Jack, as I mentioned before we started recording, was in a band with my very best friend Dave called Damaged Goods. And I went to see Damaged Goods, and I can't recall if Jack was in the band at that time or not, but I know Jack was at the show. And
Mhm.
for an encore, they did Going Down the Bar by the Wretched Ones. So my friend handed me the mic and I sang, and the band's done. The show's over. Jack comes over. When people say, "Hey, great show," he's like, "You were terrible." But the way he said it was like you would expect him to say it was good, He's like, "You were terrible." And I'm like, "Great, thanks." But
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, so many great Jersey bands. Yeah, Wretched Ones. What was it? Neblik Hebbane.
look at Bang, yeah.
Uh, um, Hearse.
Yes.
So many, great New Jersey
Mental
bands.
Decay.
Mental Decay. Oh my God. Yes, of course. How could I forget? And now, Jack's got this band, Fear Gods. They're super fun. And so yeah, I'm still trying to put together this, let's do a show just like for shits and giggles. Um, just because just playing with those guys is fun. I don't even care if anybody shows up. Um, it's just always a good time, always fun. There was this guy who ran the rehearsal studio. He was this German guy. You are the loudest band that plays here. Like, what? Really, us? Especially with all these Jersey metal bands and stuff. I'm like, well, you're the loudest band? But, it's so funny.
So with the Kowalskis, obviously it began as Killer Kowalski. I know there was an issue with the Killer Kowalski, which led to the name change. I
Yeah.
guess he was cool with you guys calling it the Kowalskis without.
Yes. And this is something that like when I latch onto something, like I'm just like not letting go. I'm like a pit bull. And I think this is probably like, why Jack and Paul put up with all my shit because they were just like not this kind of people. They were just like, yeah, whatever. So, yeah, so we were playing a show at the Rat in Boston, and the promoter faxed me because this was technology back then. Um, a letter that he got from Killer Kowalski's theatrical agent, who was like 1,000 years old, Abe Ford from the A Ford Theatrical Agency. And it was like, you must cease and desist using Killer Kowalski and whatever. So I actually called the number and talked to this guy. And I was like, hey, like, we're just like a rock and roll band. We're fans, we're not trying to, pull one over on him or like capitalize on his name. He said, well, he's still active in the entertainment industry. He had this wrestling school outside of Boston, which was absolutely true. And his name was Walter Kowalski, Voldick Kowalski. And he's like, well, he's a reasonable guy. The dude gave me his home phone number, Killer Kowalski's home phone number. And I'm like, okay, like, let's see what happens here. So I call, and first I get his answering machine. And it's like, go ahead, do your worst after the tone. This is like answering machine time. And I was like, oh, hi. My name is Lindsay. I have a band called Killer Kowalski. We got your letter. I just want to talk to you about it. And so he called me back and we had a conversation, I understand where he was coming from. He was like, I make personal appearances. I still score for WWF. I'm still active. And I'm worried that, people are going to show up to the Rathskeller and expect that I'm making a personal appearance and be disappointed. And I'm like, I don't know if that's going to happen, but I do see your point. I'm like, okay, fine. So we changed the name to the Kowalskis, right? And it's funny that you, this is of course not politically correct, but when I was growing up, people used to tell Polish jokes like Polish people were stupid or whatever. But Kowalski is the most common name in Poland. So people in Poland tell Kowalski jokes like they're the dumbest of the dumb. Like, oh, see what this Kowalski did. So Kowalski is like almost synonymous with an idiot. So anyway, we changed the name, and when we were looking to put out our record, our masters were acquired by another record label, and they had a problem with a band called the Amazing Royal Crowns.
Mm.
So on their label was a band called the Amazing Royal Crowns, who got sued by the Royal Crown Review. And they were two different bands, two different vibes. I don't know how this happened, but the Stewart brothers like sued them with a cease and desist that you can't be the Amazing Royal Crowns. So they changed the name to the Amazing Crowns and then got slapped again because the name change wasn't extreme enough. So when this label was going to put out our record, they were like, you can't be the Kowalskis because we already went through this with the Amazing Crowns or Amazing Royal Crowns or whoever. And, you're going to have to change your name completely. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. And I marched into their legal office and I'm like, if I get a signed letter from Killer Kowalski saying we're allowed to be the Kowalskis, can we do it? And they're like, yeah, knock yourself out. So that's what I did. I typed up this letter about I am satisfied with the name change. This band's allowed to be the Kowalskis. I like put a signature here, signature there. I FedExed it to him with a return FedEx envelope. He signed it, said we could be the Kowalskis. I got it back and I marched into the legal office. And I'm like, here you go. We're going to be the fucking Kowalskis. I'm not changing the band name again. And they were just shocked. And my whole band was shocked. I'm like, who are you? Like, what are you doing? But I'm like, I'm just not doing this. The same thing was with, I think this is another reason why Jack and Paul put up with my shit is that the Toy Dolls were playing at Irving Plaza, and we all love the Toy Dolls. We were always listening to the Toy Dolls in the van and stuff. And they were coming to Irving Plaza and they never come to the US. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting on that show. So I was going to a show at Irving Plaza. I went to the box office and I'm like, who's opening for the toy dolls? And they're like, we don't know. I'm like, you know what? We are. So I called the next day. I called the booking office. I found out who their booking agent was. I called their booking agent. And I was like, we're playing this show. And then we got on the show with like, it was like the toy dolls, the bouncing souls, and us. And those guys were like, how did you do that? I'm like, I asked.
Hmm.
All you got to do is ask, and that's the way it's got to work. It's people don't realize like what hard work it takes to get these gigs, and you got to hustle, and it's such a pain in the ass. But yeah, it's like these things don't happen by accident. I'm like, I'm going to play with the toy dolls. So I just kind of just made sure that happened.
The first album was under the name the Kowalskis.
Yes.
And then the second album called Chinese Democracy, which is awesome. And you beat Axel by 2 years too, I believe, when you put that out.
And
No?
that record took me like 5 or 6 years to put together. And that's why it was called Chinese Democracy. We weren't taking the piss out of Guns N' Roses, but it was like this really long and grueling thing. And because of this whole like Killer Kowalski's thing, we had recorded the album in the summer of 1997. And it took until the end of 1999 to get it out because of all these like legal issues and production issues. And it was really, I think, hard for like Jack and Paul to be like hanging on that long. And they're like, oh my God, this is, it takes a lot of stamina. And they were just like, you know what? We're out. We can't do this. We got, kids to feed and mortgages to pay and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I get it. So I had to put the band back together. Like when that Goofballs album came out, it was a completely different band than what recorded it. I guess except for Greg. And then like going on the road, it was like 3 months out of the year. We did like Europe, Canada, US, like East Coast, West Coast, some Midwestern shows and stuff. And then of course people fell away because like touring is hard and doing this is hard. And I was like, God, I got to get this done. So like, in the meantime, in that whole gap, I'm still like writing songs and putting stuff together. And so in 2003, I was like, okay, I'm ready to record again. And then I actually got these like session guys from this band. They weren't session guys. They had a band called The Realistics, and I really liked them. And I was like, hey, do you want to play on this record? So, this drummer and bass player, then halfway through, I got Mike McNamara and Greg Farah back, and they did the other half of the album. So it like, really was like piecemeal, and recorded all these different sessions. And I feel like that comes out in the album. Like Goofballs is very cohesive and very streamlined, and Andy did a great job. And I listened to it today, and I'm like, it still sounds great. It like didn't age. It wasn't like, oh my God, that's like dated, and I hear all these defects or whatever. But with that Chinese Democracy album, it was so grueling. That's why I called it Chinese Democracy. He's like, of course, Guns N' Roses is going through the struggle. But I was like, God, making this freaking record, it's like Chinese Democracy. So, again, I wasn't like trying to steal the thunder or take the piss. It was just like, oh my God, this is such a struggle to get this out. That's really what that was about.
Yeah. And that was the last Kowalski's release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I moved to Sweden. I actually put together this like Swedish version of the band. I actually flew Mike over to do some shows. Uh, in Sweden, we played with the Queers. I think we played one other show. Um, and you know, after that, it just takes a lot of work and a lot of stamina. I mean, I've been through so much, and I was just kind of running out of gas. Um, and I was like, okay, maybe I'm just gonna focus on something different. And it was funny because I kind of stumbled into something else, which was there was this composer called Jed Davis, and he had a great band called Collider. He was Arturo Vega's roommate. Him and Arturo were working on this musical. They had asked me to do some vocals for the musical. And so that was like a minimal amount of involvement. Um, and so for them, like, putting that together, and then already got cancer and died, which sucked. And, kind of knocked Jed on his ass because, they were partners, they were roommates, creative collaborators. And then all of a sudden he came back and was like, hey, like your vocal tracks got trashed. Do you mind like re-recording them? And this is like 10 years later. I'm like, oh no, that's fine. And so we started working. I'm like, well, what's going on with this musical? And he's like, well, we still have to finish the recording. There's still some parts that haven't been cast. There's still this going on and that going on. And I really want to finish this like in Artie's memory. And I was like, I'm in. So I went into like the musical thing and not only just recorded the vocals, but I'm like, hey, how can I help get this to fruition? And now it took another 10 years, but the musical's done. The last, act or chapter of it's going to be recorded actually at Artie's birthday in October. But the whole thing is finished, mixed, and mastered again. We had to do it piecemeal, like, oh, here's some money to get this done. Here's money for this piece of equipment. There's still some script editing to be done, but it's 41 songs.
Wow.
It's a musical that takes place, and it's pretty much all singing over the span of I think 5 days in a pre 9/11 New York, and it takes place in this nightclub with all these misfits. It's called Rise and Shine, and Jed will tell the story. I'm going to screw this up better than me, but the first song is called Good Intentions, and Artie was like, the first song has to be called Good Intentions, and Jed was like, why? He goes, because everything starts with good intentions, and people like uh, Dickie Barrett contributed vocals. Guy from Toilet Boys did a great job. Um, CJ Ramon, like all these people, kind of like we pieced it together, through all these people. And then and the last song is called Love Wins. And Artie's like, the last song has to be called Love Wins. And Jed said, why? He goes, because love has to win in the end. And so it's really great. And it's of a kind of more innocent New York, and that's it. So it's going to be released, as a soundtrack. And then of course the next step is get it produced. We workshopped it a couple years ago at the Howell Art Space. So Artie was really good friends with Jane, who was the owner of that art space, and a lot of his artwork is displayed there. And we kind of workshopped it with like the full band and me and Jed and Guy, to try to like just show how this could be come to fruition. And so, yeah, I do all these weird musical projects. I have a DJ show on gutsyradio.org, which is like a streaming radio, and that's really fun. I get do all kinds of genres. I usually like pick a theme and focus on it. So I get really obsessive about finding all these songs that fit the theme and all this crazy stuff. But that's how I stay creative. And every once in a while I'm like, oh, I have a song in my head. I should put this down on paper, and that happens. So, but
Well, you just mentioned
can't stop it.
pre-9/11 New York. I want to get into that because in 1995, I graduated from high school and I started going to college in Montclair. I was playing in a band at that time, started that summer with guys who were a few years older, and we started hitting New York all the time. It was right to go down Route 3,
Yeah.
Lincoln Tunnel, boom, you're there. So this was like 95 to 99. What an amazing time for New York rock and roll. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
everybody was, I mean, the bands, God, D-Generation, Electric Frankenstein, Sweet Diesel. There was like a really cool scene happening with so many of those bands. Um, and many names are escaping me right now, but I mean, it was dozens of
Mhm.
bands and cool venues. And one of the places, obviously, we congregated at, played there, saw shows there, was Coney Island High.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
still revered. I was talking to a recent guest, Tommy B, and he was there all the time back then at Coney Island High, and he's from northern New Jersey. So a lot of New Jersey people I knew, they all went to Coney Island High when that was really happening. And you were, of course, a co-owner of Coney Island High. So we definitely have to get into that era because it was really an epicenter of what was happening in the mid to late 90s in New York City. Coney Island High was yourself and Jesse Malin.
Hmm.
That was
And
your,
also a guy from Jersey. So Dean from Plaza Bagels
yes,
and
backseat
his
driver, Dean.
backseat driver, yes. And I didn't know Dean at first, but Jesse knew him. And so at first, the space that was Coney Island High was owned by the Burritoville guys, and it was called Pozo Lounge. And it was booked by this guy called Georgie Seville, and Georgie Seville was the original guitar player for D-Generation,
Right.
before Danny joined. And so then Jesse got involved as like creative director and came up with the concept Coney Island High. And it was a way to expand, what Jesse, Holly, and Howie were doing with the Green Door parties, which I think started maybe in the late 80s, because, we would go to Giorgio Gamelski's place, and Giorgio like had managed the Rolling Stones and like New York Dolls and stuff. And he was just kind of like this scene maker guy, but he owned this, 3 or 4 story building on 24th Street that had a green door. So it was like, oh, you show up at, this West 24th Street address, and there'd be this party happening. There'd be like cans of beer served out of like a trash can full of ice. It was like, it wasn't really a bar or whatever. And then, Howie would be DJing, or Holly or Jesse. And they just played great music, and it was all rock and roll you could dance to. So it was everything from like James Brown to the Dead Boys to, like weird and funky stuff. I was trying to think of all the crazy music that like Howie turned me on to. Like one song that always reminds me of Howie is Captain Beefheart's Diddy Wah Diddy. Like Captain, his record label was like, can't you make a rock and roll song? So he's like, I'm going to cover a Bo Diddley song. And they were expecting this rock and roll. And then, of course, it's Captain Beefheart. It's like, you want Captain Beefheart? You got Captain Beefheart. Um, but yeah, and that kind of like whole ethos translated over. And Jesse's concept was, of course, that it was like, amusement park meets rock and roll high school. And so there was other people, partners that like came in and out and whatever. And, it was like, I think it was Jesse approached me. He's like, they're trying to get this other partner out. And he's like, do you want in? And I was like, yeah. So this was like by musicians for musicians. It was all about the music and not being like one of these shitty clubs. Like, you didn't sell, X amount of tickets, so we're not going to pay you. Even if like the show bombed, people just got beer and gas money or whatever. They walked away with something, because we knew what it was like to slug it out in the
Right.
scene. And you know, so with the booking, like Georgie did stuff. Like if someone came up with a good concept, they could do this, party. Like, Ivan Martin, who was a guy who actually played in this band called the X's with, Danny Sage, Michael Wildwood, and this guy. Yeah. So Ivan played in that band. Um, he wanted to do this, like, I don't know whether it was a swing night or something like that, called Ivan's Drive-In. We're like, cool, man, make it happen. Or different DJs. I did a Sunday night, 80s night called Fast Times at Coney Island High, with this great DJ, Tony. It was just, this kind of thing. And then, Joey Ramone lived right around the corner. So he used to like come and he'd be like, yeah, I want to do my birthday party. I want to put on some shows and do bands and, so he was like very involved, it was just like a hangout for him. And it was just very collaborative. And it was always about the bands and the music. And there were shows we put on where we knew we were either going to lose money or barely break even, but we're like, no, this is important, um, like the Iggy show. It was like, we might lose our shirts, but it's Iggy. You know what I mean? This is going to make memories for everybody. Um, or the Dickies, like we practically dragged them out of retirement, because Jesse and I were huge fans. So we'd be like, how do we get them here? And how do we at least break even? Because we have to pay 5 airfares and then hotels and all this stuff. So we would actually share the shows with other people. It wasn't like, oh, this has to be an area exclusive. We would do, 2 nights at Coney Island High, and then it would be like, oh, well, they can play Maxwell's or they can play Philly. And, I would drive them around. So we could like make all our money back and they could go home with money in their pockets. And, it was again about just creating this vibe and this good time. And that was the most important thing. And of course, we got to the point where like, gee, we do have to pay the bills, but the most important thing was like the music. I was the one that was kind of like making sure we would break even and everybody got paid and stuff like that. But it wasn't like, oh, we're in the nightclub business because we want to have like cocaine and hookers. I don't know. It wasn't our thing.
Well, I mean, you know yourself, there are plenty of clubs out there that when you walk in as a musician, you get the vibe that they really don't care about you. They're there to sell booze, and your band is cheaper than hiring a DJ. So get on
Yeah.
stage and get the fuck out. I mean, that's how a lot of clubs are. Coney Island High, I always felt like I felt safe there as a musician because everybody there got it. Like we're all like
Mhm.
on the same side of the fence, and I think
Yeah.
that was really important at that time to have a place like that. And the Bowery Electric too now has a little bit of that vibe because obviously with Jesse being involved. Um, but yeah, Coney Island High was kind of like that. It was like we can trust that we're going to be okay here. We're going to
Yeah.
be treated well.
And we were also focused on putting together a bill. Everyone wanted to play CBGBs. And if there was like a bill that was put on, it was because like the bands put together the bill. But the booking over there was just like fill a slot, fill a slot, fill a slot, fill a slot. And we were like, when we put a bill together, maybe you only know one band on the bill, but if you came and you came for the night, you're going to like all the bands. They're all going to fit. You're going to have a good time. It's going to be fun. And like the DJ is going to play music that fits with that. And it was more like we're creating, like, it's so funny. This is like such a fucking hackneyed experience. Like, we're creating an experience. But, we were being like, hey, if you're going out for the night, like this is going to be a night to remember and we're going to put it together and it's going to be fun. And that was the main thing. When we started getting hammered by like Giuliani and his goon squad toward the end, you know we had to kind of make a choice. Like, I was the one putting on the suit and going to the community board meetings and being like, we're working with the community, and going to all like the hearings and this and that and the other thing. At a certain point, we were told by the cops, like, you're on a list. There's nothing you can do to get off. We're going to come get you. And then I just turned to Jesse and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to be like, fuck you to the cops, but I'm going to go out on my feet, not on my knees. And so if we're going to have go-go girls and go-go boys on the bar, so be it. You know, if they're going to get us, they're going to get us. Like, we had some certain safeguards in place. Like, we had a kill switch to the power to the DJ station. like on a light switch by the front door. So
Mm.
if like they came to raid us, the door person would just flip the switch, it would cut the power to DJs, people would stop dancing because the music stopped, and they would go up and be like, oh, okay, there's no dancing here. I mean, that's what we got busted for, was dancing. These weird cabaret laws from Prohibition to
Mm.
regulate the jazz clubs. Because you know who hangs out and listens to jazz? Wink, wink.
Mm.
At the time, so you had to apply for this license to dance. We couldn't even apply for the license because that half of St. Mark's Place was zoned as residential, and you had to be in the other half, like the east half, was zoned as commercial. And yeah, we weren't even just eligible for the license, so there's no way we could get around that. It was just a matter of time where they caught up with us, and to fight everything legally like that was expensive, and I was just tough. So we were just like, okay, let's just see if we can run out the clock on this one. It was really hard. It was, when they came and padlocked the door, it was like having my hands tied behind my back and watching the city drown my baby in a bathtub. I mean, it was so hard. I was just like, oh, they killed it, you know. Um, I couldn't even walk down that block for at least a year and a half or
Mm.
2 years after that. I was so brokenhearted. It just sucked. And of course now I'm glad Giuliani's getting his comeuppance now, but it's 20 years too late.
That's exactly it. I mean, there's a time post 9/11, and even for a while after that, he was viewed by the masses very positively. But I just remember thinking, yeah, I know what you're about. I remember you, mother, and what
Yeah.
you did to New York City. And there are a lot of people who don't forget that. So yeah, the fact that he's, fallen out of favor could not have happened to a worse person. So I'm glad to see.
Yeah. I mean, and it was karma. He did it to himself and finally showed him for the terrible person. Like the days after 9/11, I was like, "Oh my God, he can act like a human being for 48 hours. What a feat." Um, but I knew what was behind that mask, and that he was like this Nosferatu, blood-sucking horrible person. Um, and that whole like PR. I mean, the same thing would happen with Trump. You know, my dad was a lawyer in New York and sued Trump on behalf of one of his clients that he stiffed and won. And so, again, my the whole classical music thing, it's like we had our own box at Carnegie Hall, we went to the opera all the time. I would be at the opera with my dad, and we'd see like Ivana and like Trump down in the orchestra pit from our box. And we'd be like the two old men on the Muppet Show, like, look at them, like making fun of them from the box above, you know. So, they were just like a joke, and he was a joke. He was just this, short-fingered vulgarian, if you remember Spy magazine. He was just some idiot, whose greatest accomplishment was his father died. Good for you. Um, and the fact that he had this TV show, that was kind of a joke too. I was like, oh God, like, do people really think that he knows what he's doing? And then when he became president, I was like, thank fuck my dad is dead. I mean, that's a horrible thought, but I'm like, thank fuck my dad was dead. Like he was rolling in his grave. I mean, I would just be like, when 9/11 happened, I was like, my dad was a born and bred New Yorker. I'm like, this would break his heart. I'm so glad he's dead. And same with Trump being president of the United States. Like, how the fuck did that happen? Just
Well,
insane.
about 20 years ago, I lived in LA and I was working as a managing editor for a gambling publication. So
Awesome.
our
I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah, it was so that publication we'd cover like the World Series of Poker and stuff like that.
Oh,
So
cool.
our advertiser base would be all the major casinos in Vegas and even out in
Yeah.
California. So who owned casinos? our buddy Donald. I'm pretty sure he still owes us money for those ads, and we're 20 years in. I mean,
Of
the magazine's done,
course.
but they're Larry Flint. You can set your watch by how on time he was with his payments. Trump
Yeah.
was always like 120 days out, and beyond.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's ever paid up in full with us, even now. And it doesn't matter
No.
now, but
That's his shtick, is that, he's a deadbeat, he doesn't pay his bills, he doesn't pay his contractors. It's like, you know, I, I don't even know, you see these things on social media. I saw this one and it was like Aryan Nation, and someone had tattooed Trump's ugly fucking face on their back. And I was like, wow, like I wouldn't even tattoo like my mother's face on my body, you know what I mean? It's just holy Christmas, like people have really lost their minds. And you know, people could say, oh, politicians are corrupt and all politics sucks and yada yada yada. But they're like, yeah, no, one is just as bad as the other. I'm like, if you cannot see the difference between this one and that one, I don't know how you're still alive. Like, why haven't you walked into traffic if you can't make such a fucking obvious choice? It's like you're like a candidate for a Darwin Award. It's like there's not even, and you don't even have to like the other side, but there is a clear difference, you know, between this crazy, like, you know, just money grab, grift, horribleness, rapist. The funny thing is like most women see it, not the women who value their whiteness over their gender. Like those women are a different kind, But it's like even when Kavanaugh was up for Supreme Court, all of my friends were like, oh, I know that guy. I recognize that guy. That was the guy that like pinned me down in the frat house. Every single woman I knew was like, oh my God, that's the guy. Everyone saw that. At least all my female friends. And that's what Trump is. Everyone, like all the women I know, are just like, oh my God, that's the guy. That's who just like takes what he wants and doesn't give a shit. So, I mean, whatever you want to say about Biden or George Bush or whatever, like I didn't think they were rapists. Had that going for them.
on a much more positive note, going back to
Bring it
music,
up here. Punk rock.
yeah, you mentioned was it the Manges? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, they say Manges,
Manji.
and I was like, how did you get your name? And they were like, like the mange, like the cat disease. And I'm like, oh, like mange. So it's like the plural of mange, which I thought was mange, but maybe not. It's kind of funny. So yeah, they're great. And you know, they were they're much younger, they were much younger than us. They took all the right lessons from bands like the Ramones. um they have such great energy, and even they've been around for like 20 years now, or 25 years. And they're such a pleasure to play with, great guys. And I know people say that when a band sucks, but it's so nice that they're great guys and a great band. And they're still doing it, like, thank God. We met a lot of great Italian bands through them, like, the Pee-wees was another one, and so many. So they were great to tour with. The Manges are just so much fun. I'm so glad that they're still like rocking it out.
And you covered the Goonies are good enough with them.
Yes, I actually, this is gonna sound crazy, but I saw the Goonies from start to finish for the first time like about a month ago.
Really?
They they did it at our local art house theater as like this art house theater. Sorry, I'm gonna reach behind me. And because we've been talking for a long time, I need to wet my whistle. So behind me, I have a box of what we call cardboard dough. Um, cardboard dough. It's such a great, like, my English friend came up with that, and I was like, why doesn't everybody call box wine cardboard dough? It's just so good. So, yes, we did the Goonies. So they were doing an album called The Manges Were Good Enough. And that was the album that they came to New York to record it. They recorded it with the guy who was doing like our sound and engineering for a long time. This guy, well, Tony Kowalski, we called him Guru because he was always like sorting everything out. Um, and so he was producing the record. And at the time, they didn't have like a lead guitar player, but they wanted like some lead work. So a guy, Steve, who played with us for a while and also did the Manges tours with us, he did some tracks. But then this is when Mike Hoffman from Vacant Lot got involved, and we started playing together was because of the Manges thing. And so, yeah, the Goonies song there, I was like, we want you to sing it. And I was like, holy crap, I don't even know if I know this song. But, and Cyndi Lauper, her voice is deceptively high. Like if I can watch someone at karaoke try to sing Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Like everyone's like, oh, I know that song. It's a popular song. It's an easy song. It is like operatic. But she does that, she does all these like arpeggios and like hits every note on the way. Like she doesn't slide into it, slide out of it. It's like I've seen people do it. Like they're pick, oh, girls just want to have fun. I'm gonna sing this song, and they're like, I realize my fatal error. It's hard. And so I was like, oh crap, can I even do this? And so I worked really hard because, I have like more one of these like low throaty, like Joan Jett type or Kim Shattuck type voices, than this beautiful, like crisp, athletic soprano that, Cyndi Lauper does.
Yeah, but I love the version you guys do on that EP.
Oh, it's great. And the Manges were so great on that. I remember when we were like, when Tony was doing the final mix, there's all these things that get lost in translation. And they're like, oh, the Charleston needs to be louder. And we were both like, Charleston, like, and that's what in Italy they call the hi-hat.
Oh,
It took us like forever to figure that out. Just little things like that. But they're so great. I feel like with the Manges, we have like friends for life. I still like reach out to them like when they're posting stuff, or I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing? Because one of them was living in London, Moss. And every time I went to London, I was like, are you here? Just yeah, great people.
that's excellent. That's excellent. I wanted to bring up another project and to kind of preamble it. We talked about the 90s, and there were a lot of bands
Yeah.
that had some massive success, but there were a lot of great bands in the 90s that really should have been much bigger than they were.
Oh yeah.
Our list is probably longer on that list than the ones who made it.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
one of the bands on the top of my list from that era, Too Much Joy.
Oh my God.
And
This
I
is
bring
really
them up because you've worked with a couple of members of Too Much Joy in Vicious Cobain. So,
good. So, but this is gets even funnier. Is Too Much Joy is from Scarsdale. So, um, there were a few of us that, were early into, like the new music is what they called it at the time. And there was a great radio station in New York, and you probably got it out in New Jersey called WPIX, which was playing all that kind of music in like 79. And that's where I first heard the Clash, and I used to hear these songs like "Making Plans for Nigel" and like "Run to Crazy Eddie" and buy the record, you know. Um,
Crazy Eddie.
Crazy, I know. That's where I bought my records. So there was a guy who actually became an A&R guy. And he was from Scarsdale, and his name was Hans Haldol. And he used to run like the record department at my local Crazy Eddie. And yeah, he was like, "Oh, you again," you know. But yeah, there was so much good music, at the time. And another guy from Scarsdale, he's still playing around. He had a band called Codeine and another band called Come, and he's played with Thurston Moore and stuff, called Chris Brokaw. He bought me my first Ramones record. We went to like J&R Music or something, or Harvey Sound near us, and he was like, "Oh, you need to have this," and it was Leave Home. And I was like, "Okay." So
That
then
was
I
my
got out
first
my guitar.
too.
What?
That was my first Ramones album too.
Oh, really? Yeah, it was so good. It has like carbonate glue on it. I still have it. Um, and so yeah, so Sandy Smalls, who's the bass player, and Tim Quirk, were friends of mine like from junior high. Like I went to Sandy's bar mitzvah, and Tim was like in my homeroom in sixth grade. And I actually went to a party and like, kissed him, and apparently I was his first kiss, which was like pretty funny. But yeah, it turned out, they kind of were doing their thing, and I was doing the Coney Island thing, and like we sort of crisscrossed, and we never kind of, and then I think Sandy was doing A&R for Atlantic when I was doing Starkist, and we were kind of just comparing notes about music and stuff. And then I didn't even know how we got reconnected. Oh, I did when I did this crazy 50th birthday party, which was just me and Mike with guitars. Sandy showed up and he was like, "Wow, that was kind of brilliant. Like, we should make a band." And I'm like, "Really?" Because I thought of them as like a real band, and I always thought like, "Oh, I'm just like a poser or something." You know, I just never thought I was taken very seriously as a musician. I'm like, "Wow, someone wants to play with me. That's kind of shocking." And so, yeah, so we're like, we came up with this concept. He pulled in Tommy, the drummer from Too Much Joy, and then this other guy, Steve, who was kind of playing with them. He had a band called Head Wound. And Steve was just like a genius. He's like just one of these like crazy guitar wizards, effects and stuff. And it was great. Like we had so much fun playing together. And that was the concept. We called it Vicious Cobain because it was songs between the death of Sid Vicious and the death of Kurt Cobain, but we didn't play Sex Pistol songs and we didn't play Nirvana songs. It was more like these kind of like what we thought of like as hidden gems. Like we used to play like XTC songs, and some of them were like big hits and some of them weren't. Like we used to play, I Want to Destroy You by the Soft Boys, and uh oh, we played Do It Clean. But it was just, we were just meant to be a fun party band. It was just fun to play those songs.
Is that past tense now? Vicious Cobain or
Yeah, we were actually talking about, because I mean this is terrifying, but I just had my like 40th high school reunion at Scarsdale, and I was like, "Oh, we should do like a pre-game thing where we do like a bar show before or something, or like an after party, as like a joke." And Sandy was kind of like, "I'm not that much of a joiner, but I'm like, why not? I mean, we survived 40 friggin' years after high school. I think that's an accomplishment."
hmm. Yeah, that could be cool. And like I say, Too Much Joy, that was one of those lost bands that, like the Serial
Totally.
Killers album, you know,
So great.
I always tell people there were other important albums from 1991, and Serial Killers was one of them. Too Much Joy.
You know who would agree with you? Jed Davis, who is the composer of The Rise and Shine. He was like, "Oh my God." You know, when I was talking to him and I was like, "Did you ever get on the jellyfish train?" And he was like, "No, they were too like, like, the thinking man." He was like, "No, I was all about Too Much Joy." And everybody was like losing their shit over jellyfish. Um, and I never got into jellyfish at the time. I kind of discovered them later. You know who turned me on to jellyfish? Leonard Phillips from the Dickies, he was like, "Oh yeah, you need to listen to Jellyfish," and he was also really into XTC. He's like, "I love that Andy Partridge got in touch with his inner Lennon," and that was like a perfect way of, because there's kind of like this split. XTC was very almost like no wave,
Right.
like their first album, and even up through like Drums and Wires and stuff, and that started to morph, and then Oranges and Lemons was like really where he got in touch with his inner Lennon. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so the Goops was another band like that. And
Yes.
they even had that one band on well, I don't know, those were, I mean, one album, sorry, on Reprise, which was like Green Day's label. And I was like, they're just going to go boom. And I don't know what happened because that was a great record. That was lucky. But their first one on Blackout, which was our original label,
Mhm.
um, it was great. I listened to all the time. Like Booze Cabana was a great single. That video got play on Beavis and Butthead.
I remember
That,
them. Yeah. I
yeah,
remember
that
them.
was really great. There were bands like, I don't know, Thin Lizard Dawn,
Yes.
uh, and oh God, like the not the Beautiful was one of them, but I'm trying to think of the band that was after that. Like the Fluid. There were so many really good bands that were doing that power pop thing. Actually, one of the biggest shames for me was that the drummer for Starkist was a really great songwriter, and she just had that like intuitive sense of songwriting. Like her lyrics just flowed, and her tunes were great. Um, she needed to work with somebody to like kind of like be like an arranger, but like her concepts and her music and her tunes and her lyrics were amazing. And so when she would do stuff like with Starkist, I would just like help her put some structure around it, and then they would be, the best songs that we had. And so she had a band called Spanky. Um,
I have that record
yeah, it's
with Daniel
great.
Ray. With Daniel Ray.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I got
And
that.
so when she had Spanky, Daniel Ray played that role. Like he was helping like to structure the songs and put them in, and that was something that, really helped her music shine. And they were great live, and she was great live. And again, it like imploded. They were going to get signed to Epic Records, and then it just blew up. And that never happened. And I had like their whole like almost like a whole demo tape, like a whole album of stuff. And I don't even know what happened to that, but it was like one of my most treasured cassettes. And it just disappeared. And I would love to hear all that music again. Um, but Daniel keeps everything under lock and keys,
What
keeps everything
was
close to the chest.
what was that band? Brigitte was a singer.
Oh, New York
New York
Loose.
Blues.
She
Yes.
was another one that was really great. Like, so she had a band with Ricky, who was her longtime, boyfriend, partner, whatever. Uh, at the time, D Generation started coming up in the scene called Viva La Wattage. And even those first couple New York Loose singles, I know that Ricky like co-wrote a bunch of them. And yeah, so they were, really great, like tuneful. She's a great front person. And you know, they were about to go boom. They got signed to Hollywood Records, and then they got Gary Sunshine. He's like, whatever, this big guy. And I don't know what happened, like because everything was there, and I don't know why it didn't take off. It was funny because at the time, we were in the same scene. So when Viva La Wattage was playing with like Ricky, and early versions of degeneration were happening, like Hope or whatever. This is when I was with Danny. It was like 10 years from like 84 to like 94. We were together. We were always in each other's orbit, but like we never really became friends. Like Jenny and I and like Sandy and the other girls that became Starkist, we kind of like latched onto each other, like cool, like we're like the chicks club. And, um, it was funny because I don't even know why Bridget and I weren't friends there, but there was one show that I thought we were going to be playing together, and I was like, cool, man, but I was told that she didn't want to play with us, and I kind of was sort of like really, like my feelings were hurt. And I was like, well, does she not like me or whatever? She don't like my band. That's fine. But it was weird that years later we reconnected. Like she moved to England and she started doing music again. She put out a great record, probably about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. It sounded really fucking good. And, she was kind of like, why weren't we friends? I'm like, I don't know. We should have been, but uh but yeah, so she's still doing music, and again, like she's kind of like me, she like can't stay away from it. Like I have to make music, like sharks have to swim to breathe. Like I have to always be doing something, but it takes a lot out of you too, so then I like take back, take a break. It's just it takes a lot of stamina. I was talking to family members about, you look at an artist like Taylor Swift, and I don't, care what anybody thinks about her music or whatever, but you look at those level of artists like Lady Gaga or Madonna, Taylor Swift, da, 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 da. And someone even said to me like, "Oh, you could have been like Lady Gaga," and I'm like, I don't know, because the work that it takes to get to that level and the work that it takes to sustain it,
Mhm.
I felt myself getting to a point where I felt like it could take off. And I was like, I don't know, like, because all this weird shit started happening. Like, I started getting like weird fan mail and death threats and, like stalkers and stuff. And I'm like, can I really do this? Like, do I really want to give up this part of myself? Like, I just want to make music. I didn't want to be famous. I mean, it's nice. I wish I'd take the money. So, now I feel like I should be writing songs for Miley Cyrus, and I'll just collect the royalties and be in obscurity. I'm perfectly happy with that.
Well, even the massive stars have their struggles. I remember years ago, when I
Of
first got out of
course.
school, I was running a music magazine for a bit, and Christina Aguilera had exploded at that time. So
She's a great singer.
oh, she's amazing. And our holy grail was to get an interview with Christina. And I knew her publicist pretty well. And she was always like, Christina's really sick. She has like 104 fever. I'm like, isn't she performing at the American Music Awards tonight? And they're like, yeah, they're still going to put her on stage. I'm like, how are you? Take this girl off the road,
Yeah.
And then Christina came out with that album Dirty, where she was like rebelling against the industry, so to speak.
Mhm.
And people thought, oh, how contrived. No, no, no. They were working that girl to death, and she said, enough. I'm done with this.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
like,
that's what happened to Britney Spears. Poor girl had been a performing monkey for her family, since she was 5 years old. Like, if you Google that, her Star Search performance when she was like this child, she actually had like a deeper, more womanly voice. And then they wanted her to be like more poppy and stuff. And then they were like, oh, she cracked up when she was 25. Yeah, because she'd been working already for 20 years, never been allowed to be a kid. She had to sustain this ridiculous schedule, this ridiculous image, this ridiculous amount of stamina. And she had kids on top of it. And it's like anyone would crack up. And with the fact that they put her on a conservative ship for basically trying to protect her child from paparazzi, like I remember being in the front seat of my car and sitting on my mom's lap. That's what she did. Instead of like taking the time out to put the kid back in the baby seat, she like put the kid on her lap and drove away. And they're like, oh, she's a bad mother. I mean, that is the most ridiculous thing. Anybody would have done that. Like, rather than like, oh, I'm going to open this door and do this while people are attacking me. You know what I mean? It's almost like the poor thing, like just let the girl be, and I would crack up. I just, that's really, I was trying to explain it because, even in the New York scene, people were like, well, this band got famous because they knew people, or they did this, or they did that, or they got this break or that break. And I was like, you know what? It's not one of those things. It's all of those things. You have to have all of those things. You have to have connections. You have to be the right place at the right time. You have to get like the right gigs, the right breaks. You have to work hard. Like with me, bugging Irving Plaza until we got the Toy Dolls gig. That was just a Toy Dolls gig. That was like one fucking gig. Like imagine having to do that every goddamn day of the week. I can't.
Yeah. And then you're always on that shaky foundation where you reach a certain level and it can all fall apart the next day.
Absolutely. You have
A&R
a
guy
band
can get
member that
fired.
quits.
Yeah.
I mean, or, band falls apart, or, this person drops out of the tour, you get knocked on your ass, and then, I'd spend about 30 seconds feeling sorry for myself and be like, okay, now I got to get up and do it all over again. So there was one time I was like home with my mom, and, again, the band fell apart for like the 40th time. And I'm like, fuck. So I got to put this back together again. And my mom was like, well, honey, there's so many talented musicians in New York. Like, why is this so hard? And I'm like, Mom, uh, you know how it took you 50 years to find like a husband you could live with? And she's like, yeah. I go, try finding three more of them.
Yeah.
So, it's not about talent, or who can play or whatever. Again, you got to have that chemistry. And then that was like the amazing thing about me, Jack, Paul, and Greg, is that we could stumble into a studio 15 years later and basically just like go boom and hit our stride and be like, wow, this is a thing. So when I was like, hey, let's play the Rebellion Festival in Blackpool, England, like, thank God we didn't do it this year because there was like some kooky riot, some millionaire lady like started this false rumor that some Muslim immigrant committed some crime, and then there's all these right-wing riots, and one of them happened in Blackpool. Um, and it like ruined everything for everybody. But anyway, I want to get there. So that's on my bucket list. Me playing Blackpool. I want to do it next year. I finally got in touch with the promoters. I finally got them to respond to one of my and this is like me begging for the show at Irving Plaza with the Toy Dolls. I'm like, I'm gonna get in there. I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna get in there. So I have until next August to figure it out.
Hope it happens. Hope it happens.
I know it's funny, when you were talking about the 90s, Coney Island High, like there's almost too many bands to list, but every once in a while someone puts, our like strip ad that would be in the Village Voice. And it was like, oh my God, there's like so many bands,
Hmm.
and bands from all like, all over the country. There's bands like, Less Than Jake and the Dillinger Four and like Aquabats, and, of course, perennial bands like the Descendants and the Vandals and all this stuff. But like so many New York bands. There was one you mentioned. Was it Sweet Little Roxana? Oh wait, what was the band with Georgie Seville? Like Sticky. They were like a great glam rock band. The Amazing Cherubs. Was that the
Right.
band?
Yes.
Uh, oh, Jonathan Fire Eater was really
Yes.
great. The Stiffs.
Yes.
Like there was, oh my God, I like if I really went down the list, it would really have to take, I would have to take some time to compile this, but there's probably 100 bands, that I thought were great. Eldorado, um, again, Vacant Lot. They had like perfect pop songs. To me, they were like the Buzzcocks or something. They had these great 3-minute pop ditties. Love that. Um, but yeah. So any other bands that you want to give a shout out to?
Oh gosh. I mean, just that whole era was so magical, and to look back on it now, we were so lucky to be in that
Yeah,
spot at that city at that
I
time.
agree.
And in my case, being of that age, where you're able, I was able to get to the city, and I was in college and all this new stuff was happening. I wasn't a kid anymore, and I'm getting into new trouble, new kinds of trouble in a different city. And, I mean, this was the 90s. It certainly wasn't the 80s New York I've heard about, but it was still sketchy. There was still that element of what could happen tonight at
Yeah,
for sure.
there's some, of course, growing up in New York in the 70s, there was a real element of danger. We had an alarm inside our car, and my dad used to like take Bruckner Boulevard to avoid the toll, like, because that's a good idea with your family in the car. Um, and then like the 80s and Squeegee Men and like crack made the city go crazy. And that's like when I was going to school downtown and working in a nightclub. And then like the 90s, I think like the crack times had calmed down, thank God. Um, but yeah, they're like with music, it was like a super exciting time. Um, there was so much going on, and I think that people got interested in rock and roll again.
Yeah.
And the 80s, you had like, new wave and all of synth pop and stuff like that, which is fine. But like that resurgence of like rock and roll and like danceable rock and roll, and that really came in like in the 2000s, which was pretty cool with like the Strokes and the Killers and bands like Franz Ferdinand and stuff. I'm like, oh, they get it, they get danceable rock and roll, got it. So I mean, that was just, it was such a great, what a time to be alive. But that's where I really feel like Forrest Gump stumbled into all this great stuff. And I'm just so glad that I was there as it was happening. I certainly didn't make it happen, but it was great to be a spectator.
And the 90s, it seems like a strange thing to mention now, like, back in my day, but even in the 90s, 30 years ago,
Hmm.
I mean, there wasn't any of this, and there certainly wasn't any of that in the 80s. But in the 90s, it was, you were reading the East Coast Rocker or the Village
Yeah.
Voice, or you're reading zines, or you're just word of mouth, or you'd randomly go to Coney Island High or to Connections in Clifton or the Loop Lounge in Passaic.
Uh-huh.
It's Saturday, something's got to be happening, and then
Yeah.
you see a band you never saw before, you know.
And that was the thing with like stepping outside your door. It was more, I try to communicate this to like my nieces and nephews, that like this is a full contact sport, man. If like half of the thing is getting out the door, right? And especially I understand with COVID, getting out the door nowadays is hard, especially we have all these streaming services, everything can come to you, but there's something with that like full contact thing. And granted, since I grew up with that, that's like my default position, even though there's sometimes I'm like, I just want to sit here and eat ramen noodles and watch like shitty murder shows. But you know, there's that element that's missing, even with the fanzine culture. The way we communicate it is like you wrote a postcard to Maximum Rock and Roll or Flipside or whatever, and then they would like publish it like a month or two later. So, and then people would write to you, and then that would come back like a month or two later. Like it was, I almost felt like we had like cans with string Like sending carrier pigeons. And like that's the thing is like people are like, oh, technology, is it good or bad? Or like was it better then or now? The good thing about the technology now and having the internet and having these online like communities or groups is if like you're a weirdo or a freak or you're into this really specific thing, it is so easy to find people that are like you and find that community and get that instant contact. And thank God, like there's people like me out there, like no kid is getting beat up because they have a mohawk anymore. Thank God. Like that's the thing is that, for me getting slammed into lockers and being called a fag or whatever because I had a funny haircut. Yo, Devo. That was the one that always killed me. Like the street where we had, hey, yo, Devo. Um, you know, like thank God, it that nowadays, like even gender fluidity or identity, like you can be whatever you want and you can find your community. And it doesn't mean people aren't going to hate on you, but it's not as extreme as it was before. Like you can find people or you can find acceptance and it's not that hard. Thank God. And that's the good thing. Like the kids are all right. Even in rock and roll, I hear new bands now or like newer bands, like the Struts or, I hear new bands all the time. And I'm like, Amyl and Sniffers. I'm like, oh my God, the kids are all right. Yay.
They're great. They're
They're
great.
great. Like,
Yeah.
thank God, I like want a big hugger. Like I'm like her mommy or her grandmother probably. Um, you know, I'm like, oh my God, the kids are all right. And that's really what it's all about is that, the music you were coming of age to, like Too Much Joy or whatever, or the music I was coming of age to, like the whole Vicious Cobain thing was like, this was the music I came of age to, so it means a lot to me. And, the music you came of age to in the 90s. And so that's the whole thing is that, you know, when Marilyn Manson was happening and people were like, oh, they suck. And I'm like, it's not for you. You know, it's
Exactly.
it's to piss off your parents. Like Marilyn Manson was to that kid what Kiss was to me when I was 12. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And people were saying they were Satanists and this and that, thing, drinking blood. I don't care. But, you know, every generation has its music, and Taylor Swift, like it's amazing how uncanny, like she just tapped into this voice of a generation of girls, who were feeling powerless or put down or whatever, and they're finding a voice, and like God bless them, and there's rock and roll bands now that are speaking to kids that are like, oh my God, and if you don't understand it, sorry, Granny, it's not for you. It's not for me. You know what I mean? If I happen to like
Exactly.
it, cool, man.
What matters is younger people are finding their music that gives them their voice. Because you and I both know the right record will save your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like that. Like I used to stay awake at night or sleep with the radio on that WPIX, 102.9 or whatever it was. Um, And I used to wake up like in the middle of the night and hear the Boomtown Rats, like it would wake me up and be like, I really want to hear the song, or Bram Tchaikovsky, or, you know, Blondie, or, whatever it was. And I was like, oh my God, this is like my lifeline. This is the way I feel. And it was so good to have that. We're very fortunate, but every generation should, does have that, and you have to respect that. You can be like, oh, it was better back in the day, because there was always crap music. I mean, Muskrat Love, come on, we had crap music too. um there's always crap pop music, and then there's always, you know that amazing, well crafted music that's going to last a lifetime. And you can't, disparage that. You can't take that away from people, we have plenty of crap music, believe me.
Well, I mean, the reality is, with any hope, there's a 15-year-old kid somewhere right now online listening to a record that we would think is horrendous, that we wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, right?
Hmm.
But that song might be making that teenager feel less alone.
Hmm.
That's the whole point.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if we like it,
Yep.
you know?
Yeah, and that's the
We
thing. It's
had
like
our
it's
music.
not for you.
Yes, yes,
And if there wasn't an adult out there being like, turn that shit off, that's been age-old thing since, Elvis or Big Bopper, even the 40s, Big 10-inch record, whatever it is. There's always gonna be old people that are like, turn that shit off. And then, the young person that's gonna be like, this speaks for me, this speaks to me, this saved my life. I don't feel like a weirdo or a misfit. These are my people. And that's the amazing thing.
yeah,
Um, so it's amazing to me, I guess. You never know whatever you do or put out there, means to people. But every once in a while I'd get like a message or an email or something of how someone's like, this really meant something to me. And I'm like, well, wow, it's like the greatest compliment you can receive because it's like, oh shit, I didn't think I was doing anything important, but if people like it, wow, I'm like, I'm freaking grateful. I'm like, really?
yeah,
Like that? I'm gonna do it whether people like it or not, but when people like it, it's kind of like, wow, that's really, something special.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This has been so much fun.
I know, especially like Humboldt, New Jersey, especially you're mentioning like, Clifton, Loop Lounge and Passaic, and then, Dingbats and Connections, because Dean owned Connections for a while, like Dean Bagels, and he's just such a great person. He was so great to have like as a partner, really cool guy. Um, and then of course down south, like City Limits,
City
you know,
Gardens down in
City
Trenton.
Gardens, sorry. Yeah, City Gardens.
Randy.
And yes, and he had that amazing record shop. And it's just, I spent hours at that record shop, like so good. You know, such a great connection. People can't give New Jersey shit. Um, and then of course, oh, here's another one from the '90s that I think should have like been like a boom. Fountains of Wayne.
Yes,
Holy Christmas. You
yes.
know, not punk rock, but like I still think like that song Hack and Sack is just like this heartbreaking, amazing work of art. Um, Speaking of Jersey, it's
And
no
then
rock and roll gas station.
you bounce you bounce around the country. Chicago had Material Issue, amazing pop punk, power pop band,
Oh,
call it.
love, love, love. Yes. Teenage Fan Club.
Yeah.
Like that's really, so a lot of times when I do my radio show, I play stuff like this, like Material Issue and Teenage Fan Club and Fountains of Wayne and a lot of like obscure like sort of power pop bands because again that's a music that speaks to me that I can go down this like little rabbit hole and that's the stuff that I grew up on. Brill building songwriters,
Hmm.
all those songwriters that wrote for bands like the Monkees and the Archies or whatever, like that's what I was listening to. So I was like, oh, who wrote these songs? So when I was 5, I knew who Boyce and Hart were. They were writing for like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie. Like it's crazy. So, that's a good song. You can't kill a good song.
No.
I go by the Bo Diddley thing. Like there's two kinds of music, good music and bad music. And I'm very accepting of all the genres, even like rap and hip hop and bust out some Easy E every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean NWA was a punk rock record as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, oh hell yeah. Yeah, definitely. And there's actually a Two Live Crew and Too Much Joy connection. You should look it up.
Oh,
There's
I
some,
know about that. I was watching that in real time on the news back in 91.
yeah, yeah. I still have like I was unpacking because it's like I moved into a house and it's under construction, so half my shit is still in boxes. But I was unpacking this box and I have a Down with OPP baseball cap. And I should really like bust that out and wear that more often and see who cares.
Oh, I know that. If I saw that on walking down the street, I go, ha ha, I know that.
1992.
Hey,
Hi.
I'm from New Jersey, so was Naughty by Nature.
Yes. Yes. Awesome. Jersey in the house. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. It's been great catching up. God, we could probably go on forever, but I'm sure you have to cut off at a certain point and
Well,
edit.
I thank you for the, sharing the history and on a personal level, thank you just for being someone who brought Coney Island High into existence.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny because like Jesse kicked that off, but um, at a certain time, like you had to you know, I came in to make sure the place was like running and had beer and the bills were paid. Someone had to do that. I'm like, Jess, that I have an MBA and I can do all this stuff, right? Like, cause he didn't really know. Like he just knew me as, his friend's girlfriend. And I was like, no, I can really do this stuff. So yeah, that was interesting. So yeah. And I'm gonna be in New York for Jesse's, big comeback show on
Mm,
December 1st at the Beacon. So that's like, that's really great. Let's still praying for his recovery. He's doing as good as he can. He's working really hard to get back to where he can perform, and it's been a really hard road too.
yeah. Yeah. Well, the guy's given us so much.
I know. If anyone could overcome anything by sheer force of will, it would be Jess. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
as always, sending love to Jesse Mowen. Um, just that era was just so fantastic, and it's just a joy to connect with you, to talk about it, and everything else. And we were talking about the world being a very small place earlier,
Yeah,
so I'm very sure that our paths will cross again soon. I have no doubt.
absolutely.
Excellent. Lindsay, thank you so much.
Oh, and thank you. Been such a pleasure. Absolutely a joy. Really fun.